All right. And I want to thank them both for these interviews, which don't take place the way they usually do, and they're being very flexible with the equipment that we have. So thank you both for joining me. Let's start talking. You said the land of Mau Mau, and that is that revolutionary movement is one that most people in the U.S. are familiar with, but I don't think people know how it was crushed and how the new state of Kenya differed from their vision. Can you talk about that?
Um, you know, when the oppressor impose their will upon us. This is what happened. That when the Imperial British invaded Kenya, they took the Kenyan people and put them into concentration camp, and then reduced them only into laborers and introduced taxation to make sure that they could actually make them workers of the Imperial British. So people were denied land as a core fundamental to life. The entire Kenyan land was under the Queen Mama of Britain. This is important. Now, how did, when this happened, the propaganda that engaged and delayed the fight for freedom was that the superiority of race. So in essence, the British prince at that time was campaigning that the black African population will never crush. And in fact, there are certain reflections that Jaramogi Oginga Odinga wrote in his book, Not Yet Uhuru, that even they couldn't believe that a white person could die. So remember, what I'm trying to put through to the Black Agenda Report listeners, that the politics of deception that now we see in this counter summit, launched by Macron offensive, started with the Imperial British way before. And at the time of it, or when the World War I broke, World War II, the Imperial British needed African fighters. So some of the African fighters were recruited to fight in World War II on the side of the Imperial. Now, this brought new awakening. So there were certain things like Dedan Kimathi would say, oh, the white people breathe, they can die, So the whole deception around white superiority was broken. But the material conditions were even more severe. So the Mau Mau became an absolute necessity, because as revolutionaries, some people think that we choose violence or we choose the gun willingly to liberate our people. Mau Mau did not choose the gun willingly. It was the only option left by the oppressor for them, to pick the gun and fight. Even now, in our country, you have seen the ruthlessness of the neo-colonial state. Every time the state behaves in such a manner to crush our will, what happens to our comrades? Our comrades even get more radical. So remember, last year, after the GNZ uprising, because today, comrade, it was better for us, because we are giving statements about comrades that are breathing, they are alive, they are in jail. But during the GNZ uprising, what did we do? We were giving statement to declare martyrdom of our comrades, which was even much more difficult. Now, what logic came from that is similar to that of Mau Mau? You could remember the discussion in the party was that the AK-47 was the equalizer. Because when they marched and said they were peaceful, the police murdered them. So in essence, who is responsible for an armed violence in an oppressed nation is the oppressor themselves. And that is why I'm saying that the rogue British Empire forced the Kenyan peasants and the poor people to confront them with arms and violence because their violence was so great. Then after that, 1957, that is when Dedan Kimathi was captured, the leader of Mau Mau. Actually, in 1957, he was hanged in February, the same year, 1957, 18th of February. What was this about? Because remember, the Kenyan population, mainly the nationalists, also had some of the intellectuals had gone to get some education in London. In fact, free political prisoners was based in Manchester, where our constitution was. The Manchester Constitution that delivered independence to us was a negotiated independent constitution by one Tory called Tomboy. And he made sure that the land remains in the hands of the oppressor. This is what we must know. Now, some of this also brought, because remember how contradiction works. You take the Kenyan people to fight for you. They come back with a new consciousness that you can die. Mm-hmm. So everything the British did to us, it came up with a new solution. They recruited some of the compliant people. You know, the British divided our country in several tribes and were setting tribes against them. So they recruited some people that they thought could not go against them. Mm-hmm. But one of them was Jomo Kenyatta, the so-called founder of Kenya, because he went abroad to learn and he realized that the same problems that are facing the African people are the same problems that are facing the white population in British at that time, only that at a different level. So what basically happened is that Jomo Kenyatta printed a newslet on self-rule and he was also arrested. So the aspect I'm trying to bring to you is that they are always now, Jomo Kenyatta is in jail, Dedan Kimathi is in jail. But who is willing to negotiate with the British Empire? It is Jomo Kenyatta. Because Jomo Kenyatta is not fighting a fight of necessity. He went abroad, he's a nationalist, he has land. The only consciousness that he has gained is not through social practice, but through reading books. Mm-hmm. So he's more susceptible to negotiating with British. So British starts to prepare him for leadership. Now, when British are preparing for leadership, the question at the center of it that when Jomo Kenyatta is released to lead Kenya, where Dedan Kimathi is in prison, Kenyans will start demanding that release Dedan Kimathi. So what does the Imperial British do? They cut the neck of Kimathi, so that even if the masses wanted Kimathi, there is no Kimathi to talk about. So Kimathi still lies unmarked grave since white passed. So this is important to us. Why we are saying that, comrade, is that even as we will, if this country is functioning, okay, we will not be revolutionary. We would like to spend our time with our loved ones, our family. We would like to do some poetry, do some dance. But now how can you do that when you can see repression and oppression in your doorstep? And shamelessly, the ruling class in our country do not care. They even go, next year there will be an election campaign. They will go to the poor of the poorest with cars worth 22 million. No water, no drinking water, no running water, no basic human, but they feel nothing. Only they go to hand for God. So we welcome you again, and if you say that the Kenya is the land for Mau Mau, Mau Mau was not crushed. Mau Mau was betrayed by the reactionary nationalists led by Jomo Kenyatta through a negotiation independence. And after that, the Mau Mau people that were left in the streets, in the bush, that refused to come out and tell land, well, that was the origin of the first military base here in our country. But took the British, Imperial British military base, because when Jomo Kenyatta negotiated, there was also a wave of coups in the African continent. So So they said Jomo Kenyatta will make you the president, he will implement as the British Queen wants, and in return we will guarantee security, and this security will also be physical force. And physical forces take this land and construct it into a military base to protect Jomo Kenyatta at that time. So essentially, Kimberly, what I'm trying to tell you is that we are dealing with a country that is being actually suffocated by imperialism. Remember, even the most basic capitalist development, we don't have. People, if you get an opportunity to go to the rural areas, people still ache life by using a manual gem to try and earn a living. Everybody in this country has a loan. It's either a mobile app loan or you are paying a phone loan. So imperialism has taken all facets of socio-economic life in Kenya. And that is why for us we're saying without weakening or defeating imperialism, there cannot be progress. And as Amete Cabral said, without political independence and economic sovereignty, there is no socialism. So we cannot construct socialism in a neo-colonial society dominated by imperialism. We must defeat imperialism. Only then we can reconsolidate and start the most urgent task of socialist construction and building steadfastly the productive forces to work on. This is our informed, correct position. Maybe Macron today and President Ruto can win through propaganda. But we always remind Ruto that as long as you don't address the joblessness of the young people, you'll have to face the communists. You can have temporary, progress, maybe you beat us, you take us off. But if you want to lead a country, you should not even mind of us running around. You're giving us a lot of relevance. What you can do is build the national economy, start protecting the youth, then the communists want to be there. But if you don't do that, then you have to deal with us.
Yes.
This is the logic. Yeah.
And that brings us to why we are here this week. It was originally called the France-Africa Summit. President Macron of France visiting, signing this agreement with President Ruto. And it was very strange. It's strange until you think about it. France keeping as neo-colonies, but being kicked out of the Sahel states, but still wanting to have a position on the African continent, a military base, or extracting resources. And then they announced there's going to be this summit. And then they changed the name, so it was pretty obvious that it did not make it. And then it was Africa Forward. They took France out of it. Except Macron was here, and President Ruto was here, and they laughed and smiled and shook hands and signed documents.
Yeah.
But tell me, Ashlyn, what is wrong with this agreement? I mean, it may seem very obvious to many people, but basically, what is the problem with this agreement that they signed? What does it do to the Kenyan people?
So essentially, it's popular knowledge that French imperialism was ejected out of West Africa. And since imperialism is a bad student and it doesn't want to go away, so it relocates. And it said, okay, we think Kenya is the best destination for us. So even as Kenya was declared a non-NATO ally, it was not just about intensification of imperialism in East Africa, but they are building, their residue of making sure their finance capital is deeply entrenched in the Kenyan soil. For the reactionary African Forward Summit, there is a lot of wrongs with it, because number one is anti-people. Majority of our people were not aware of the plans to host African Forward, or the decisions between the Kenyan government and that of France. Then even before the actual summit, which is just symbolic session to rubber stamp what they already started. But essentially, we know there are things that they have done. So there is the defense agreement between France and Kenya. This was done in a very unconstitutional way. Because the bill was signed in October 2025. Then in late December, they did public participation, which was only for 2 weeks, and it was during it's called the Christmas festivals, where most people are engaged in family activities. And they went ahead to take it to Parliament, and after a few weeks, it's rationalized, and they want us to accept it as a bill. So majority of the Kenyan people are not familiar with the clauses, with the kind of details inside that agreement. So it's something alien to them. Even majority of them, when they learned that there is a defense agreement between Kenya and France, it was a shock. But essentially, majority of the DCA that Kenya has signed with other countries, there is no they're never open about it. It is done through, a lot of secrecy, and there is no transparency with it, because they know this is one of their ways to protect the interest.
And they know it's what people don't want.
Yes,
so,
definitely.
and that's why you would need the secrecy.
Yes, they don't want, but also they need to, protect the interest in Kenya, and they can only protect it when they have made sure these policies are now laws.
Yeah.
Else they are not able to advance, the kind of benefits, the kind of projects, profiteering enterprises in our country. So they come first, even before our laws, before our constitution. Yeah. And yes, also when we got the news that 800 troops got into Kenya, most Kenyans in the coastal regions were asking, now who are these? Because they're asking, so are we getting more foreign troops into our country, which greatly undermines our sovereignty. And also, the land question is central to the Kenyan people. So if they are building more military bases in the country, then that's a very crucial question for the Kenyan people. Majority of us are dispossessed. We are poor, landless, and the most oppressed. So if the Kenyan comprador class is able to give land to foreigners, and even the constitution allows it, then there is something greatly wrong with that agreement. Yeah. Then also lastly is I think we have a lot of France companies in Kenya that are advancing carbon projects in the country. And we only got to learn about this when we started organizing PASAI, because now PASAI had to develop its own instrument of not only organizing but also bringing analysis of how the nature of this summit is linked to the political, ecological, military, and even economic ties. So with the carbon credits also, it's something that touches on not only on the climate oppression, but also the land question as well. So I think all these elements of this agreement were unpopular, were anti-people, and the goal was the continuous subordination of our people, and undermining our sovereignty.
I wanted to ask you about this word that is suddenly on the lips of people who don't care about Africa, the term Pan-Africanism. So President Ruto, when he agreed to, for example, send Kenyan police to help the U.S. occupy Haiti, he claimed this was a Pan-African policy. Macron, yesterday, the president of France, claimed we are the true Pan-Africanists. So talk to us about the use of language and how it can be used by our by enemies.
First of all, imperialism like to deceive. So that is why they say something when they mean something else. You know, so we say you cannot have objective talk with them, or you cannot, because imperialism coins those words. Look at terrorism.
Yeah.
We are forcing multiple terrorist charges, but who is really a terrorist? Even at international level, we cannot agree. Now, Pan-Africanism started out of necessity, outside the African continent, by the oppressed black race that found themselves in places they did not go willingly. So they started to problematize the situation that they found themselves. This is the original Pan-Africanism, the desire of our motherland, the desire that we found ourselves as slaves. Does it mean we did not have a home when we were being born? So, Pan-Africanism, its origin comes from not the working class, but the petty.
From the
Petty middle class intellectual. And I will give you a few examples. Talk about Sengo, negritude. We want African people to go back to Africa mentally and physically. That's Sengo. Talk about the philosopher here, Odera Orogo, the philosophy of sagacity. To go back and have interviews with old African people that have never interacted with white colonizers to see if they have rigor of thought. So it took a lot of time for just an African person to say, I can think. This was a big problem. And then the research institutions were finding anything that was written by black people to showcase. That is what you look at the Egypt civilization. We even went at philosophers now to study the works of Socrates and all that to find out if they ever interacted with the African continent and what did they learn. What does that mean? In the Southern Africa, there is Ubuntu. Is Ubuntu a bad thing? No. Is Ubuntu a bad thing or a good thing? No and yes. No, because Ubuntu we are, because I am, was an African school of thought when Africa had very limited or no class development at all. In fact, many historians call it advanced communalism or primitive communism. So essentially the CIA, Scotland Yard at that time, promotes Pan-Africanism glazed to advance their domination. So Pan-Africanism of Tom Mboya was crafted by CIA. So Pan-Africanism of Root is crafted by CIA. So the issue is that the interest of the United States ruling class and their junior pastors in Europe want to create confusion in the African continent. You know, when you're confused, you can't up. Let us say we are with Comrade Ashlyn here. Ashlyn is saying, tomorrow we are going to court. For me, I'm saying, no, tomorrow we are going to the studio. So there's chaos. So there is no clear policy of what to be done. So in essence, the key idea around Pan-Africanism, there is Pan-Africanism and there is Pan-Africanism. Now, there is reactionary Pan-Africanism, there is revolutionary Pan-Africanism. Now, revolutionary Pan-Africanism, in essence, is a counterpunch to reactionary Pan-Africanism. Because reactionary Pan-Africanism deceives the black oppressed people that their oppression emerges from just the melanin of the skin or non-melanin. No. we must then bring sense to it, that the Pan-Africanism as conceived by Senghor and all other thinkers at that time was to demonstrate to the European racist critics or racist thinker that we are not an innocent race living like wild animals in the forest. So we wasted, remember Kwame Nkrumah, he's from Europe. Why is there slow uptaking of Marxism with Kwame Nkrumah? He still comes up with conscientism to try and go down to the roots of the African continent and find what are the ideas that are relevant to the communist movement, but how can we place them in the sense that they don't look like foreign ideas? What about Mwalimu Julius Nyerere? He was already studying socialism and communism when he was in the US and the UK. But when he came home, he's saying, now, look at Hegel. Look at Feuerbach. These are philosophers, these are European philosophers that are actually spreading this body of knowledge. We must find how to recraft it. So Pan-Africanism, there are people who look at it as a movement. There are people who look at Pan-Africanism as an ideology. And then there are people who look at Pan-Africanism as an objective. So the Communist Party Marxist Kenya takes the correct position that Pan-Africanism is a genuine desire for the African people, both within the continent and outside the continent, for a true liberation. But now, as we are socialists, then we say that the objective is a totally liberated Africa and African people within the continent and without the continent, but under scientific socialism. In that case, we say that we have clarified the question of Pan-Africanism very low. And now we can have clarity in action. So this is what I wanted to say, that Pan-Africanism as a fact is being used severally, even within the business sector. But the idea is to separate people with the history of Pan-Africanism, bring it as a new corporate ideology that to be advanced by only careerist people. This is our thinking.
And we're seeing that with people like Macron and President Ruto.
Yeah.
So as we close, what do you? I'll give you the floor. What is it you would most like our listeners to know about your party, or about your work, or about you, your legal situation? What is it you would most want to convey?
Please tell them that Communist Party Marxist Kenya is a product of international solidarity. Tell them that even if they are far away from home, a statement from the United States means more to the Kenyan state. Today, the only reason why President William Samoei Ruto is worried is not that he wanted to overthrow his government, but because we have continued to rule all platforms that we find young people, to give them a counter-logic. So this is extremely important, that we have been a beneficiary of international solidarity, and we hope that the Black Alliance for Peace will continue to stand with us, to send us messages of solidarity, and even to help us bring what Comrade Ashlyn always say, a sense of revolutionary optimism, even when we know we are facing a war. So we cannot give up. So this is one thing that you have to tell them. The second thing is, which for us is that we would like to continue to work together, because the enemy is one, in terms of forming an anti-imperialist front, to make sure that victory can come soon, not later. So if there is an anti-imperialist program that we would like to participate in, kindly share with us. And then finally, I think the issue of political education is very important. And we're just hoping that we could find more ways to share with our comrades in Black Alliance office, even if it comes to mass education. For us, this is important. There are certain problems that we face that you don't face, but there are also problems that we face that you don't face. For example, when we are advancing our struggle, the Kenyan Revolution, and you're advancing the revolution within the imperial court, probably you are even in a much greater surveillance. That is the case. So what do you go? Tell them that we have passed our warm greetings. Tell them that we have brothers and sisters in the African continent who are fighting, only that in different trenches, but the struggle is one. The struggle for socialism.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you very much for joining me.
And my apologies, I've done this interview when I'm very tired. So if there are any mistakes in this interview, the Black Alliance members must know that we are immortal and we make mistakes and we will accept any correction. But today we are also very happy, extremely happy.
Well, we were very happy to be here. Thank you so much. And yes, it has been a very long day. And I want to tell our viewers, I usually have a different setup, but so I want to tell our viewers that this is how we have to do things. Sometimes we have to do things on the fly, and I'm sure people will appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much.